Well, thank you everyone for attending. We're going to go ahead and get the session started. I do see folks continuing to join the meeting, but in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get the presentation started. And thank you again for attending our presentation on sanctions and exclusions automation. We're going to talk about a solution, a little bit about what's going on in the market here today, and then a solution that we provide that basically can help automate this whole sanctions and exclusion management process. My name is Tom Leahy. I am the SVP of Sales and Business Development with SureShield. I have been in the risk and compliance and safety arena for close to 30 years. And really have done a lot of work in the healthcare sector. Obviously, what we're talking about here today is primarily focused around requirements and compliance requirements for healthcare providers. And as you know, those of you that have participated here or on this call, you really, under the offices or the domains of the Health and Human Services, there's two oversight agencies that are responsible for compliance monitoring for healthcare entities. We have the Office of the Inspector General, who is, requires that organizations that work with vendors or individuals who are receiving any type of federal or state money are validating and making sure that they are not working with anyone who is excluded from participating in those programs. And that oversight is done by the OIG. And then we have the Office of Civil Rights that oversees and makes sure that organizations are following the proper HIPAA compliance requirements. So you kind of have a double whammy of different folks that are, or organizations that are making sure that your healthcare institution is following recommended guidelines for this type of oversight. And the consequences, particularly, we're going to focus obviously today on the sanctions and exclusion piece, but in either case, the consequences of having a sanctioned or excluded individual working with you or having a HIPAA violation not only has significant reputational damage, but it also comes with some very, very, very significant financial penalties and fines for that. If you're working with a provider that's been submitting any claims, you could be subject up to more than almost $16,000 per claim that has been submitted by one of those providers. So the penalties are significant. And the recently the OIG in their most recent report to Congress already pointed out that there have been more than 2,400 providers added to the exclusion list just in 2022. There has been an exponential increase in Medicare fraud. Of course, COVID led to a lot of those types of issues where, one, there was kind of a dual components going on. The government was providing some levity to healthcare organizations, understanding the criticality of what they were dealing with from a patient care perspective with COVID. And so the oversight requirements perhaps lapsed a little bit. At the same time, there was a exponential number of bad players coming in to take advantage of those situations. And there's been numerous examples in the last year of fraud that's taken place due to issues focused around COVID as well. So needless to say, now that things have calmed down, the government is really improving and putting more money into enforcement of these particular policies, these particular requirements. In addition to that, there's been a lot of new organizations and countries that have been added to exclusions lists from, Russia, China, Iran, and others. And oftentimes a healthcare organization may not know that they even perhaps are doing business with a vendor that could be from one of those banned entities. And it has been, studies have shown that anywhere from 2 to 5% of medical professionals at any given time are on an exclusion list. that means for you within your own organization, it's very likely, or the potential that close 2 to 5% of the folks that are working within your environment statistically could be on one of these lists. And of course, as depending upon the size of your organization, this can be a very, very difficult thing to manage and provide the proper oversight for. So, the recommendations that the OIG has for companies and for healthcare organizations, whether they're hospitals, physician practices, home health agencies, skilled nursing units, any of these, at a minimum, and most likely all of you do this, you will screen all your new employees or providers or contractors or vendors in the beginning phases just to make sure that you don't have any potential issues with those. Most organizations do. There are some cases where they don't. But at a minimum, if you're looking to bring anybody into your ecosystem, you should be doing a screen on them to make sure that they're not on any one of those lists. And as we know, and there are multiple lists. There are, I believe, 5 federal sanctions and exclusions bodies. And then within the states, there's another, I believe, 41 states that have state exclusions and sanction lists. And all of these should be checked, particularly if you're a provider that's working in multiple states. It's also recommended that all of those, once they're in your ecosystem, that they be rescreened on a regular basis. And the recommendation is that that is done at least monthly. Now, again, even in a small entity, you could have hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals or companies or providers that are in those environments. And trying to do that can be difficult to do. And of course, if you do have an issue, the most important thing you can provide is that you can demonstrate to the OIG that you've had a solid screening process in place, that you can show how frequently that's been done, that you can show the dates that's been done, that you can show the databases that have been checked. And if you don't have that evidence, you're just putting yourself at a greater risk of larger penalties. And again, the quicker you can act, if you do identify a bad player that's come in, the less likely you are to suffer more significant fines and penalties, obviously, from the OIG. But this can be a bit of a daunting task, because what are some of the challenges? It can be a very expensive process if you're checking things manually. It can be very time consuming. A lot of organizations are checking with Excel sheets and going out and monitoring these databases on their own. And if the larger you are without having tools in place, it's almost impossible to try to check that entire ecosystem. So sometimes they're either doing this by sending this out periodically to have someone else do that for you, or you're just stratifying what you might consider to be your high-risk folks within that ecosystem and spending more time doing checks on them as opposed to checking the entire process. And if you don't have a means to be doing this correctly, then obviously you're putting yourself more at risk to having a potential problem. And at the same time, you want to do it in a fashion that can be the most cost-effective for you, because as compliance professionals, this is not the only process or requirements that you have in place. So before I go on, I thought I would launch just a quick little poll to get a sense from the audience about how you are actually going about this process, how often you do it, and then how you are going about currently doing your sanctions and exclusions monitoring processes. So if you don't mind, just please go in and answer the questions to this particular poll. We'll give it about a minute or so. Excellent. And it looks like a large percentage of you are generally, it's great. It's kind of a mixed. I see ones that are only doing it once a year, which can be a bit risky. I do see a few folks that are saying they're doing it once a month, which really is a good process and good way to do that. And it's a combination of manual, meaning folks going out manually, or folks using third-party companies that are out doing that. And that's great. So it sounds like at least you have some processes in place for doing this. What I'm going to share with you is a methodology and a tool that can help do this for you in what I would call a 24/7 type of process. So I've noticed that there was someone that was using a third-party tool. I'm making an assumption that that is either come to and you run the checks and they're kind of more point-in-time checks that are done. In the case of a solution that we provide, we've actually created a process that does, I think of it as almost like a managed by exception process. We provide what we call a real-time automated continuous monitoring solution that monitors all these databases. So basically what we've done is develop technology that will scrape all these databases at any given point in time. It will look for updates in those databases, and then it will do automatic daily matches to your ecosystem records, whether that be your vendors, your doctors, your nurses, your contract workers, your employees. It does that all continuously on a daily basis. So what it will do is, first of all, provide you information on what you look like today. And then more importantly, if there is an issue, it will call that issue out immediately so that you are really, if you're in a fairly large ecosystem, you want to be focused on taking action on things that need to be addressed. If you're finding that everything is okay and that people aren't on a list, you don't necessarily want to check to be aware of that. Let the system do that for you. And that's what we call integrity shield for sanctions and exclusion monitoring does for you. And just this is a bit of a comical graphic, but to actually kind of give you an idea of what the difference is between our processes and other processes as well. So let's make an assumption that you have checked the provider on day one. You've either run them through the software that you're currently using, or you're doing a manual check. And you found on that day one that everything was fine. Now, for those of you that are doing a monthly process, let's say that provider ended up on your list on day 3. Well, if you're doing a monthly check, there's 28 days of time that provider is working in your environment that you would not know until you've checked them again that following month. And so obviously the risk exposure that is there is pretty significant depending on what that provider does for you. In the case of SureShield's Integrity Shield process, what we are doing is checking daily. So on that day, you may have checked that person on day 1 and everything was fine. And on day 3, you got an alert because the time in between them, we had notified and identified that provider had then ended up on that list. And we will automatically notify you and allow you then to take the proper actions you need to do to, first of all, validate that data is correct, and then take appropriate corrective actions to get them out of your environment or to remove them from your environment. And in doing so, protecting your organization. Visually, this is a bit of a graphic around how this all works, but basically we have our source databases behind the scene, whether it be the SAM, the LEIE, the OFAC, and then we also have practitioner databases, statewide exclusion lists. Our systems have a process of going in and checking that source data daily and then matching them up to your provider ecosystem. And there's a number of ways in which we do that. We've automated with a number of our partners where we're getting daily feeds of all of their providers, their new hires, their practitioners, and we're updating that and then matching that up to the list. And or, we are having a regular update that's provided in there to match up your ecosystem and run it against the databases that we have. And this again shows you all the different states and the federal databases that we check. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of how of what we call our sanctions and exclusions integrity shield monitoring process. I've signed in, and the first thing you'll get is a very quick summary report that tells you for that day, some basics about what is going on in your environment. The other thing that we're doing with the data that we provide is providing a lot of what we call quality of match information. So depending upon the data that you have in and validating that against the provider databases that we have, we can tell you the quality in terms of the accuracy of how close that information is. And then it allows you to update that information to make it even that much more useful to you. So when you come in, again, we've got kind of what we would call a dashboard-based view. First of all, it's showing me a tile that's telling me the matches that were found. Anything that you've put into a work list may be that you've identified what appears to be a sanctioned individual, and now you're going to take an appropriate action to determine, first of all, maybe send out information to validate them, the information that you've received. That would be a work list item. And again, all of this information is getting cataloged and captured all the time so that you know at any given point in time when that data was checked, who it was checked against, and also having all what we would call the audit records on that. It will show you any of those, these records that have been violated. The other thing that's really important about our solution is we not only provide you information that's current, but we can also provide you past data. So if you have a provider that's come into your environment or you're considering bringing into your environment, even if they're not currently on that list, you may want to know if they had been on one before, as a cautionary bit of information to say, while they're not on now, maybe they were on in the past, and you should be extra vigilant of that particular individual if indeed you're going to bring them into your ecosystem. And then it will also provide you any of the information on the tasks and the requests that you may have sent out. You can go into each one of these tiles very easily to see what you've done. In this case, you can see for Dr. Krasuski, we've sent out information to validate and check to make sure that what we've received in that on that sanction item is validated. You can do primary source verification type work as well. Just to point out again, overall, if I were looking at my overall active records, you can see here again, you can utilize our system. Most people do it for everything, but you might have a provider group that wants to check their providers on their own. So you're not required to use each and every one of these screening pieces, but again, we can show you that you can also segment these screens based upon whether they are providers, whether they're employees, whether they're vendors that are contracted, whether they're individual contracted individuals as well. And again, you can see within this ecosystem, I've got 995 records that we're screening. There was recently one that was just updated. Match records would show those that have current and past sanctions on them. And again, that's just going into those lists to look at that as well. But coming back to the home page here, again, if I were to have someone that matched and showed up on that record, if I click into that particular record, you're going to get information on specifically what was the match, what was the particular exclusion list that they showed up on. So you can see in this case, it was the SAM. It will show the matching of the records from the record database that we have that's over here on the right, and the records that were provided by the individuals at the customer. at your level. So you can see it's even giving you dates and times as to when that last record was updated within the organization. It will also show you here, as you can see, within these, there's already over 183,000 records that are in this list. You'll also note it will show you those that have been updated and those that were new as of a particular date. So this is a demo database, so that's why it is showing a date of May 11th. But, you know, it's kind of interesting and actually eye-opening to see how many records are added on almost a daily basis to these databases. So oftentimes, like we said, you may have somebody within your own ecosystem that is fine one day and they show up on the exclusion list the next day. Again, within here, as you go into things like your task and request records, you can look and see all the different items and the different tasks and all the different, what I would say, processes that have been run on this individual as well. So information you have on them, any databases that have been checked, when those databases were checked, what I would call is a full-on audit trail as to how often and when those individuals were checked as well. And this is all done again in an automated fashion. So and lastly, there are, of course, a number of different reports that get generated out of the system. You may have requirements for monthly meetings in which you need to provide information on what was checked, who was checked, what databases were checked. All those are provided automated in our exclusions and sanctions reporting components. So it's as simple as just clicking on that button, indicating if you had multiple entities, they would show up here. So we do have what we call a hierarchy. If you have more than one entity that's being checked more maybe centrally. And then, simply clicking and running those reports. And these reports as well can be distributed, or they can be scheduled to run out to different folks. So you can see things like the number of data sources and records that were checked, where they were both on an international or federal level, the states that were checked, and then what it looks like within your own organization in terms of how you're performing. All very, very good information. And even more important, if you do have an issue and the OIG is asking for information, that full and complete audit log on this as well. So that is the Integrity Shield SES. Again, in terms of how we have set this up, there are a number of different ways in which the source data can get to us, from manually entering if you're a smaller entity. And each time you have a new person you're first going to screen, you can go in and simply check, do a quick validation, make sure that you're in good shape before you even continue on a process of contracting. And then once they're in the system, they will be constantly checked. We have ways in which you can upload information, and then a lot of organizations are going that next step of being able to have us interface with source databases. So anytime you have someone new that's been added to your ecosystem, our solution will first check it, validate it, and then do that ongoing check for you. So a number of key benefits. Obviously, it's a continuous monitoring. It's a regular daily monitoring. It's different from even those of you that are using other software that you might be using to help do those checks for you, but aren't doing it in a continuous manner. And really, the licensing of this, you're not charged based upon how many checks are done or how often you're doing checks. We basically get a sense of what the ecosystem looks like, and then the costs for using this are basically a license fee for the year for doing that. So a very predictable cost. And what it also allows you to do is not have to send it out to third parties, and really to be able to monitor this on your own without any additional resources. So with that, we often have a lot of folks that are interested in testing out the solution. We can make that available to you if you would like to, first of all, have the ability to trial it or test it on your own. I'm going to place that offer out for you and for those who are participating today. If you're interested in trialing the solution, we let folks try it out. You can check it up, check it out against your current systems you have in place today. No need to change anything you have in place, but to actually try it and see how it matches up to what you're currently using. And then if you find it to be of use, we can talk about what the cost of that would be. And I see that there are a few of you that are indicating an interest in trialing out the solution as well. So with that, hopefully we're buying you back a little bit of time, but why don't we open it up to questions that we may perhaps have from the audience here today. And all you'll need to do is go to the Q&A portion of Zoom and open up and ask those questions. So I see a question around how many databases are being checked. Chandi, if you can perhaps chime in. I believe there's 6 federal databases in 41 states now.
Yeah, so we have close to 60 different data sources, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah.
So very, very comprehensive in terms of how that works. And we are, as we said, checking those daily. Not all of those are updated on a daily basis, but we're going in and making sure every day that we check them so that if there is any change in those, that is being reflected in an update in a match against your current ecosystem. Again, one other question, as I said, on cost. It does depend on the number of sources that we're checking and the volume of the checks that are being done. But these are, the cost of these solutions are in the thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands area. And depending upon the size of the entities that we have, it's a very, very cost-effective and protective solution for your healthcare organization. And I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. We'll keep it open again for just another minute or so. Just as a note to those of you who are participating here today, we'll be sending you out the content of this presentation, as well as a copy of the recording of the presentation as well. If you are perhaps interested, for those of you who have indicated interest in trialing, we will be reaching out with you to set up a time to get your trial started. And for those who might be thinking about doing this later or might want to check later, please feel free. You'll see within the email that goes out to you an opportunity to connect with us, and we will continue to keep you updated on any new features or components we've added, as well as areas that SureShield is assisting in helping with compliance, integrity, and risk protection. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude the presentation. We appreciate your time today and wish you all the best, and hope you all have a very nice Memorial Day weekend. Thank you again for participating in our presentation here today.